Mari McInterney from Croakey here, and we're at #EquallyWellAust, the Equally Well Symposium in Melbourne, and I have one of the keynoters here who would very kindly introduce himself.
My name's Dr. Simon Rosenbaum. I'm from the School of Psychiatry at the University of New South Wales.
Thank you very much. Now, you're speaking this morning in the opening session. Would you just outline the issues, really, that we're looking at and what you'll be talking about as the exercise ambassador, really, yeah?
Sure. So I guess this whole conference is looking at the physical health of people living with mental illness, and obviously we know that people living with mental illness experience really high rates of poor physical health, so things like diabetes and obesity, which actually contribute to not only making mental health worse, but actually reducing life expectancy and sort of widening these inequalities that we see in this group. So I'm really excited to be here talking about the role of exercise and diet, and that's and lifestyle more broadly, and that's the work that we do at UNSW. Really looking at how we can use exercise and diet to actually help people living with mental illness to not only recover from the mental illness, but to improve their physical health simultaneously. So what I'm going to be talking about today, I guess, is the principles of lifestyle interventions and how services can implement and start running these interventions really as part of routine care.
What are the barriers to that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I guess we've got to think that there's barriers to everyone being active. You know, we've got really poor rates of activity here in Australia, and in fact only about a third of Australians actually do enough exercise, and that's without the additional barriers of living with a mental illness. We're ranked, I think, 97th in the world in terms of people actually being sufficiently active. So there's heaps of barriers that people experience, and I guess those barriers are compounded when people living with a mental illness. So things like poor motivation, not being able to find the time, not being able to get out of bed, all the barriers that everyone else experiences as well, but they're really compounded. So the challenge is, how do we actually create the right culture, the right services and support, so that we can actually help these people to engage in exercise and healthy lifestyle choices.
And it's not just a motivational thing either, is it? There are some real structural issues involved there.
Yeah, of course. Part of it is the way that we actually conceptualise and think about these interventions, and if we treat it as just an added extra, so something that, yeah, of course exercise is important, but people should just be able to do that themselves, we know we're not going to get very far. So it really is an issue of equality and equity, actually, and actually making sure that we meet the needs of people so that we can support them to get active. And that requires an investment and it requires support. But I think if we look at the evidence long term, we're actually going to save money by putting resources into these sorts of strategies.
Can you give us a good example of where it's been done well?
Sure. So in New South Wales, where I've been really fortunate to work with the Keeping the Body in Mind team at South East Sydney Local Health District, and there's a great project there led by Dr. Jackie Curtis, where they've really integrated exercise and diet as part of routine care for young people living with psychosis. And they've shown some fantastic outcomes, showing that, again, exercise can improve physical health, improve mental health, but also change the entire culture of a mental health service, and actually showing that we can use these strategies to help engage people in more traditional mental health treatment as well.
If you could make something happen, where would you have to go to get it started? Is this just a step-by-step basis, service to service to service, or do we need leadership elsewhere?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's incremental. So we need top-down and bottom-up changes. So we need clinicians on the front line actually advocating for these sorts of interventions, and that will happen once they can see the benefits for themselves. But we also need policymakers and people at the top to make sure that we provide the right culture, the right services, the right infrastructure to allow this to happen. But I think there's been talked before that this isn't a gap in knowledge, it's just a lack or a failure of implementation, and I think that's very clear. We know what to do, we know how to do it, we just have to make sure that we fund it and actually do it.
Now, you're very kindly doing this, even though you're probably suffering extreme jet lag because you've been tripping all over the place at the moment. And we wrote a story about you in the preview that you've been working with refugees in Bangladesh. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I guess my PhD looked at the role of exercise in post-traumatic stress disorder, working mainly with inpatients, and we showed a really significant effect of what happens when we add exercise to usual care. And I think that's a really important point. We're not saying here that these interventions replace existing treatment. They absolutely don't, but they should be an adjunct. They should be offered as part of it. And so that work then led me, really interested in the role of these interventions within trauma and vulnerable populations more broadly. And then I was able to team up with a colleague, Dr. Ruth Wells, who does a lot of work with refugee populations, and That was my third trip to Bangladesh, where we were looking at the role of exercise within the camp. And what was really fascinating is that, whether it's a refugee in Bangladesh or a soldier here in Australia or someone in a high resource setting, when people talk about the benefits of exercise, it's actually completely transcultural and universal. So we're really interested now in working with partners over there to actually help train local Rohingya to work as sports therapists and to actually help make sure that people within the camps have access to these sorts of interventions.
And what is the impact? What are the benefits? We tend as a culture to focus entirely on weight loss and things like that. What are the benefits?
Well, that's a good question. It's one of the points I'm going to make today, is that actually we need to completely separate exercise from weight loss. There's a big misconception that exercise is really effective for weight loss, when actually, in fact, without changing our diet, exercise really isn't all that effective. And it's not why we want people exercising. We don't want, particularly people living with mental illness, to be thinking that they have to exercise for weight loss. That's not actually going to change behaviour. We want people exercising because they feel better about themselves, they reduce their symptoms, they get the social benefits, they feel connected as part of a community, it gives structure, it gives routine. So there's so many benefits of meaningful physical activity beyond weight loss that we actually need to completely remove weight loss from the discussion.
And given you're leading a very hectic life and you are missing out on sleep and all those sorts of things, what's your self-care routine? What do you do?
Yeah, I think for me, I have to do something almost every day, but it's as simple, even if you have 5 minutes, there's a lot you can do in a hotel room, even just, the cliche things like walking instead of, too often people think that unless, we do an hour a day or whatever it is, that it's not beneficial. And actually we know that everything counts, and especially when it comes to the mental health benefits of exercise, as little as 5 minutes can make a big difference. So it's really just about, taking that first step and actually getting moving and trying to do something.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.